Blessings. This is a video to go over what are the stages of awakening, or the 5 steps of consciousness. And you will go through these different levels of consciousness and awaken at different moments, and then move back into the different stages through different things that you become aware of or have insight to. This is a process that we all move through over and over again. Then there is a way that you can look at it as, what are the 5 stages of awakening? Knowing that we're going to awaken to different insights as we move through this journey over and over and over again, until we can hold the higher levels of consciousness for really long periods of time, until we actually move into that state of consciousness altogether. So the first level of consciousness is unconscious. This is the level where we are unaware that we are not awakened. And this can also be a level of consciousness of just moving into the awakening altogether. So if you were a part of collective consciousness and had your awakening that you are actually the creator of your life, that would be a step of awakening. And then there is another way that you can awaken, is when you have insight to something that you did not have insight before. So you awoken to that program or that state of consciousness that no longer serves you. And we can't change something unless we have the awareness that something needs to be changed. So this is the part where the universe shows you something, and if we take the time to actually see what the universe is showing us, we can move from unconsciousness to the awakening. So the awakening is when we become conscious of something that we weren't conscious of before. It's also the second step of awakening, when we move out of being in collective consciousness and move into the awareness that we have choice, either with our thoughts, or that we have choice in what we want to create for ourselves within our lives. The third step that we move into is creation, or creating. And the third level of creating is when we are in trying to make it happen. We are trying to make something in order to create it. This is a very powerful place to move into. Moving from being unconscious to actually playing and creating our lives is a really important step in awakening. So this is creating through trying, or creating by trying to make it happen. When we're in the state of consciousness, the universe consistently shows us why we are unable to create certain things. This is when we start to clear belief systems. We clear out the things that no longer serve us. We have a lot of shifts in our lives. And a lot of us that have already awakened clearly can remember this stage of consciousness, because a lot of things in our life probably shifted. Once we are in this level of consciousness for a long enough period of time, we realize that it's not about what I want to create. And we move into the next level of consciousness, or next level of awakening. And this is co-creation. We move into listen and do. So we are in co-creation. And when we move into co-creation, it doesn't mean that we will stay there. A lot of times what happens is we'll move into co-creation, we hear the listen and do, we go do it, but then when we get afraid to stay in the level of trust it takes to move into co-creation, we'll take it back and either move into the third level of consciousness and try to make something happen in order to feel comfortable. Or we could even move down into being unconscious that we're even doing it. And then we have to go through the different stages of awakening around what it is that we were asked to do through our divine guidance. This is a fluctuation that can happen over and over again. And if we can stay aware of what level of consciousness we are in, as we consistently move into the next now moment, we will have more choice around what level of consciousness we want to actually be creating or existing in. Co-creation is a beautiful, beautiful place to rest in. And it's also the one that is going to test us in whether or not we truly trust with the divine within or in the divine guidance that we're receiving, and having to surrender to that over and over and over again, because it's really existing in the unknown. It is existing in the unknown space, to where trust in that guidance, and then trust when we're getting nothing, or we have no evidence of what it is we're creating, that we have to move into that centered place of, I don't have to see anything in order to have the trust. I don't have to see anything in order to continue doing what I'm told through my inner guidance. The last level of consciousness is one that we don't really hear about too often, and that is creator. This is the level of consciousness that is available to each and every one of us, and it is a practice of reaching that level of consciousness. It only makes sense that the level of consciousness from which we were created is a level of consciousness that we can move into. This is where we are no longer in listen and do, but just do. We don't have to hear the guidance in order to create, because we have moved into the level of consciousness from which we were created. Another way of saying this is that we're in divine consciousness, or the divine mind, and we are creating from that space. This is a level of consciousness that I consistently teach in our Foundations for Life, or DQ for Life. And it is a beautiful, beautiful practice. Just like we all have to practice, what level of consciousness am I in? And being able to reflect back to the universe that we are truly ready to not only hold the frequency pattern of co-creation, but we are actually ready to move into creator. And just like we had to practice the observing our thoughts and having to move through different programming and releasing that, moving in from co-creator to creator is also a practice. And it's a really wonderful practice to exist in. So I think if there is anything that I would want you to walk away with this video, is just the awareness of what level of consciousness am I in, and choosing if that's actually the level of consciousness you want to exist in, and then moving in through that awareness and choice to higher levels of consciousness. The longer that we're in these higher levels of consciousness, the more our reality starts to shift to reflect back that level of consciousness to us. This is really how we awaken to the new earth realities. You could say heaven on earth. You know, we were created from the frequency pattern of the creator, and it is here and available to each and every one of us to move into this state of consciousness, or to move into unity consciousness. Because when we move into these higher levels of consciousness, this is the frequency pattern that we're tuning into. So it also makes sense that when we move into these higher levels of consciousness, that there's less interference from the collective consciousness. We have moved past this and continue to move to higher platforms through the different existences within these 5 levels of consciousness. So play in it, have fun, be aware, and make choice. So much love to all of you. Namaste.